Good morning and welcome to Rising. Happy Monday. Happy President's Day. Is that the holiday it is today? I wouldn't even know since we're here at work making a show.
That's the holiday that we are not being allowed to recognize, but happy President's Day nonetheless, Robby.
And to our viewers, of course. Well, we've got a lot to discuss today, don't we?
We do indeed, Robby, so get us started. What is on your radar?
We're going to have a discussion about this for sure. Vice President JD Vance gave a memorable speech last Friday at the Munich Security Conference in which he assailed European leaders for betraying liberal free speech values and not taking seriously the concerns of their voters. Vance said to the gathered leaders, "To many of us on the other side of the Atlantic, it looks more and more like old entrenched interests hiding behind ugly Soviet-era words like misinformation and disinformation, who simply don't like the idea that somebody with an alternative viewpoint might express a different opinion or, God forbid, vote a different way, or even worse, win an election." In response, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said, quote, "Well, we should be very clear that free speech in Europe means you are not attacking others in ways that are against legislation and laws we have in our country," end quote. Which really proves Vance's point, does it not? European bureaucrats will only allow free speech so long as the speech in question reinforces the ideological dispositions of progressive governance. Now, we are going to discuss the substance of Vance's speech and the reactions to it a little bit later on the show. Right now, I want to focus on the American media's response to the speech, particularly Margaret Brennan of CBS News, who on Sunday asked Secretary of State Marco Rubio about his reaction to Vance's speech. What's interesting, and in my view very misguided, was how she framed her question. She implied that Europe, Germany in particular, was right to restrict free speech because free speech is what empowered the Nazis to take over and initiate the Holocaust. Watch.
Well, he was standing in a country where free speech was weaponized to conduct a genocide. And he met with the head of a political party that has far-right views and some historic ties to extreme groups. The context of that was changing the tone of it. And you know that the censorship was specifically about the right.
No, I have to disagree with you. Free speech was not used to conduct a genocide. The genocide was conducted by an authoritarian Nazi regime that happened to also be genocidal because they hated Jews and they hated minorities and they hated those that they had a list of people they hated, but primarily the Jews. There was no free speech in Nazi Germany. There was none. There was also no opposition in Nazi Germany. They were a sole and only party that governed that country. So that's not an accurate reflection of history.
Well done, Marco Rubio. His response to Brennan was correct. Now let me recite word for word what she said, because I want to rebut it myself. Brennan accused Vance of, quote, standing in a country where free speech was weaponized to conduct a genocide, end quote. What she is saying quite explicitly is that the ability of the Nazis to speak freely is what allowed them to take over Germany and kill millions of Jews. She's completely wrong. Rubio is right. This idea that Germany in the period between World War I and World War II was some free speech paradise and the Nazis used that to their advantage is false. Progressives seem to love making this claim because I've certainly heard it stated many, many times. It is not true. In fact, historians of the interwar period have a name for this false claim. They call it the Weimar fallacy. What actually happened is that due to fears of the rise of the Nazi Party, Weimar Germany took increasingly authoritarian steps to outlaw and censor Nazi speech throughout the 1920s. Greg Lukianoff, president of the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, and Nadine Strawson, a former president of the American Civil Liberties Union, co-wrote an excellent article about this in 2022. They found that far from permitting Nazis to practice free speech, the German government, quote, shut down hundreds of Nazi newspapers in a 2-year period. They shut down 99 in Prussia alone. They accelerated that crackdown on speech as the Nazis ascended to power. Hitler himself was banned from speaking in several German states from 1925 until 1927, end quote. Lukianoff and Strawson argue that the German government failed to take appropriate actions to curtail Nazi violence. Violence is not speech, and the government could have and should have done more to sanction, to prevent what was in fact political terrorism. They find little merit to the idea that aggressively censoring Nazi speech and advocacy was an effective strategy. But in any case, what we're arguing about today is whether free speech empowered the Nazis, and it's obvious that it didn't because there was not free speech for Nazis during the relevant period. That's just a fact. The German government tried desperately to censor the Nazis. It didn't work. You could even argue that it backfired. Nazis were proud to be censored because it proved that the government was scared of openly debating them. Then, of course, when the Nazis won political power, they were able to use the government's vast censorship apparatus to silence their own critics. Now, this debate over free speech may sound fairly academic, but it has real-world consequences. That's because present-day Germany is not a free speech maximalist place. The government prohibits Nazi speech and Nazi imagery, and also hate speech, spreading misinformation, and so on. 60 Minutes, another CBS News program, spotlighted the German authorities' efforts to censor bad speech today. Let's watch some of that.
It's illegal to display Nazi symbolism, a swastika, or deny the Holocaust. That's clear. Is it a crime to insult somebody in public?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
And it's a crime to insult them online as well?
Yes.
The fine could be even higher if you insult someone in the internet.
Why?
Because in internet, it stays there. If we are talking here face to face, you insult me, I insult you, okay, finish. But if you in the internet, if I insult you or a politician,
That sticks around forever.
yeah.
The prosecutors explain German law also prohibits the spread of malicious gossip, violent threats, and fake quotes.
If somebody posts something that's not true, and then somebody else reposts it or likes it, are they committing a crime?
Yeah, in the case of reposting, it is a crime as well, because the reader can't distinguish whether you just invented this or just reposted it. That's the same for us.
The punishment for breaking hate speech laws can include jail time for repeat offenders. But in most cases, a judge levies a stiff fine and sometimes keeps their devices.
How do people react when you take their phones from them?
They are shocked. It's a kind of punishment if you lose your smartphone. It's even worse than the fine you have to pay.
Because your whole life is typically on your phone now.
What you just heard was textbook demonstration of the slippery slope. It starts with banning Nazi speech. Who could object to that? Nazis are very bad. Then it's other kinds of hateful speech. Then it's insults, including insults of politicians. I hope you didn't miss that. The government can't let you insult any politicians, of course. Then it's not just the speaker being censored, but people who shared the post, people who merely liked the post. They're guilty too. I don't mean to be dramatic, but how is that not the thought police? Arrest the perpetrators of wrong speak and anyone who circulated it and anyone who liked it? Frankly, that sounds a lot like Nazi behavior to me. And look, Germany's a different country with different legal and cultural norms, so is the rest of Europe. Not for me, an American, to dictate to them what kind of speech policies they should have. Okay, fine. But I will say this, if they think they can bully American social media companies like X, Facebook, Google, into suppressing insults of politicians, I have one word for them: no. And I think that's the point JD Vance was trying to make. No.
So, as you say, Robby, we'll get into the substance of what JD Vance said in a following segment, and people should certainly tune in to that.
Yeah.
I was personally surprised that Margaret Brennan made the claims that she did in relation to Nazi Germany and free speech. And I was particularly surprised given, big network Sunday shows. It seems unlikely that she made that comparison on a whim or on the spur of the moment. We've all said things in the moment. It's like, I didn't put that right, or it wasn't the best argument. But it was a kind of ahistorical reading of things to say that it was free speech per se that gave rise to the Nazis. So I don't know where she was going with that. Where I think I disagree with you is the more fundamental question of when speech should be regulated and when it shouldn't. And I am less amenable to the slippery slope argument than you are. Now, that clip that we played obviously got a lot of viral reaction. And I was trying to look online to see what the actual investigators specifically were investigating. And I couldn't find it in that case. I could find two other instances of German authorities raiding people's homes. One was in relation to anti-Semitism. Somebody allegedly had posted "gas the Jews" and had called for Jews to be eliminated. Another one in March 2024 was about misogynistic abuse, including the advocacy of rape or sexual assault, I gather in relation to specific women. I think both of those things, the anti-Semitism in such a rank way and threats of rape or sexual assault, should be crimes. And so I think that there, of course, if you're going to prosecute a crime and it's a cyber crime, you're going to be looking at people's devices and so forth.
Sure, I think that's specific threats. It still can't be a vague threat. I don't know. Your anti-Semitism example sounds now while that speech is contemptible, vague enough to be actionable by the police. It's specific threats to commit violence or sexual assault against a specific person would be a different case. But even when you listen to them describe the kinds of things they're policing there, like insults toward politicians, doesn't that just make your hair stand up on the back and go, that worries me. And then the glee on the CBS reporter, I'm not sure which person she had like a smile on her face that disturbed me. Oh wow, you can prohibit insults of politicians over there in your magic land across the ocean?
See, here's I think the CBS reporter's response is a bit of one of those interesting ones where there's a test or it splits along ideological lines. I got the impression that she was smiling because she was surprised they were saying what they were saying.
I hope so.
And so forth. My understanding on the insults question is that it has to be, the insult has to be based upon racial or religious or those kind of categorizations. It didn't sound that way from the clip. I'm not sure what the disparity is there.
Gossip? Who gets to determine whether the gossip is accurate or not? Like those three people who come across as so arrogant to me that we get to decide what's fake and true because you post something, they say it's gossip, and well, that's their opinion. I mean, it's like it's free speech for them to discuss and debate whether your speech was valid and permissible under the law. So you just create a system where the EU bureaucrat police authority people, they have free speech to determine whether your speech is valid or not. You just don't have free speech.
Well,
hang on.
I mean, if you are prosecuted for these, you would have a jury trial, and it would therefore be up to your fellow citizens to decide whether it is free speech or not. I think that there are genuine questions about speech that is intended to incite hatred or to incite crimes. We'll, of course, get into that in the JD Vance case, but certainly much to talk about.
Yes, I guess I would just, one final point. If you're trying to persuade me to live in a slightly more Nile standards place about speech and the danger of reckless online speech to inspire violence or hate, if you were going to make the strongest case for that, steelman that argument, I think you would concede that argument is made weaker by some of the other things those people, like you would have to reassure me that we're really just stopping with speech that's going to provoke a violent mob because it's racist and hateful. And I'd say, okay, I can see, I see where you're coming from. I understand that online speech can cause problems and it's a new technology and maybe we need to update our legal norms. But then I would be immediately turned off from that argument when I hear that the people in charge of determining that also want to put gossip and insults to politicians and every other thing in that basket. Then I say, well, this is exactly why I can't trust authority figures to make these determinations.
Well, I think there is a validity to that argument. I have said before that I'm wary of laws that make it impossible to criticize a religious doctrine. I understand why we can't say all Jews, all Christians, all Muslims are X, Y, or Z, but I mean, believing in a religious doctrine is a belief, and a belief is validly subject to criticism.
All right, we will, as we said, discuss JD Vance's actual remarks in just a minute. Please stay tuned. More Rising right after this.